In this session, what I want to do is I want to show you just how easy it is for you to clone a tenant using Microsoft 365 DSC. For demo purposes, what we're going to be doing is we're going to clone the entire Azure Id configuration over a target tenant, right? So we're going to extract from a source tenant and we're going to go and clone the configuration over a target tenant. Just to keep it simple, we're going to do the Azure Id Applications, we're going to do Azure Id Users, we're going to do Azure Groups as well, and the membership. So right now what I have is I have two tenants. So I have my source tenant, which is an E5 tenant that I've created, the demo tenant that is represented by the blue S. And I also have a target tenant, which is represented by the orange edge here. That's a different tenant that doesn't have anything, right? So it doesn't have any users other than the admin. It doesn't have any groups, and it doesn't have any Azure Id applications defined. So if we go to app registration, you're going to see that it is pretty quiet in there. So nothing in there. Now, if we take a look at our source tenant, I have 6 users defined, some of them with their pictures. Now, this is really important. When we go and export the configuration from one tenant and recreate it on or clone it on a different tenant, we're not going to bring over the pictures. Now, this is something that we don't currently support, but it's not to say that it's not something we might support at one point if we have a feature request or if this is really something that people need. We can definitely put that on the backlog and address it at one point. But right now, we're only doing the metadata, so the information related to the user is what's going to get recreated at the other end. And I have right now, if you take a look at the groups, I have 3 groups. One of them with a typo, so a lowercase c. I just realized that when I was practicing the demo. I have a finance, a human resources group. If I take a look at the membership for the finance group, I can see that John and Bob are both members and that the owner is Lynn. And then last but not the least, if you go to app registrations, I have 2 apps registered, so my demo application and M365 DSC. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to launch a custom script I created that is essentially just leveraging Microsoft 365 DSC under the cover. And what this script is going to do is, first off, I'm just going to go and browse my folder, and I'm going to call this clone tenant.ks1. So I tried to be fancy by adding some emojis and stuff, but what it's doing right now, it's essentially extracting the config from my source tenant, and then it's going to compile it using the credentials from my target tenant. And then once this is done, it's going to go and apply the configuration. If we take a look at the scripts, and by the way, both scripts, so we're going to see how to also roll back your config and how to clone your tenant. Both scripts are going to be available in the YouTube video comments when this video officially gets posted to the channel. So what I'm doing here is the script essentially does 2 things. So it does 2 exports. So I'm cheating a bit here because what I'm doing is I'm doing an export of all the users first, and then I'm going to go and apply or recreate those users on the target tenant. And then I'm going to go and do the Azure Id Application and the Azure Id Groups. Reason for this is that if you're actually creating a group and you're trying to assign users to it, but those users don't exist yet, this is going to cause error, right? Because by default, when we do an export, we're doing it by alphabetical order. So we export everything that's Azure Id first, and then O365 users are going to get added a little later. So what will happen the first run is you go and you recreate everything. It will create the groups without any members. It's going to try to go and add all those users like Bob, John, and Lynn. It's going to fail because the users don't exist yet. And then later on, it's going to go and create Bob, John, and Lynn. And on the second run, then everything's going to be working fine. So in my case here, I'm actually just making sure that the dependency order is done manually. We have it on the backlog to come up with a dependency engine so that the tool would be smart enough to detect, all right, you're doing both a user and a group extract. Normally groups will have a dependency on users, therefore groups will get, or users will get created before groups are actually attempted to get created as well. But this is something we have on the backlog. There are some technical challenges around this, but for now I'm just doing it manually. So I'm exporting both. So I'm exporting the users in a file called AAD user and the rest of the configuration in AAD demo. And then later on, all I'm doing is I'm actually executing that file, so compiling the configuration with the credentials of my target tenant, which I've stored in the global variable just to make it easy for demo purposes. And then I'm going to go and restore those. And once this is done, I'm going to do the same thing for the rest of the configuration. Now, if I go back to my config, you can see that it extracted all the users. So my 6 users, it extracted my 2 Azure Id Application and my 3 Azure Id Groups, and it's currently cloning the configuration over my target tenant. what it's doing, it's currently restoring the users on my tenant. So if I was to go in and take a look at users, I should slowly start seeing some users appear, right? And as I mentioned, we don't bring the pictures over. So those users are going to be, if we compare with the source tenant, for example, right, it's going to be the same users. So Alex in my source tenant does have a picture, whereas on my target, he doesn't. And the ID, the actual object ID is different, of course, because those are separate items. They all have the same value, same property. Of course, the UPN, the user principal name, in this case here is, if you take a look at the domain, it's M365X4124. And if you take a look at the source, it's 4337. Those are different tenants, right? So I'm just recreating everything on my target tenant. So this is very useful when you're actually trying to replicate your production environment onto a dev tenant where you want your dev to go and test their code, or maybe you're just trying to test the effect or the behavior of a new feature that got rolled out to your tenant, and you don't want to play with that in production. So you just want to replicate your tenant full fidelity and be able to play on that test target. In my case here, this is a trial tenant that I created, right? So I don't risk breaking anything if I go and play in here. And it's a full fidelity replica of my production environment. There's always an asterisk there where the IDs are different, but from a data perspective or configuration perspective, I should say, it's exactly the same thing. So if I refresh again, I should have my 6 users, so they're all created, so that's good. The next thing it was doing, I believe, was the Azure Id Application. So if I go in the app registrations and I go to all applications, there we go. So I can see that my 2 applications were restored, again, with different app ID than the original one, but still, same thing. If I go in here and take a look at the redirect URL, everything's there, the secrets, like everything got brought over. And then the last thing you should do, and it might still be doing it, no, it's actually done. So it recreated all my groups. Again, different object ID, same group name, even with the same typo in the name. And if I take a look at finance, take a look at the members, I see that both Bob and John are members of that group and that Lynn is the owner. So full fidelity replica. So I clone my tenant, full fidelity, right, from one environment to another. Now that this is done, what I want to do is I actually want to go and roll back my changes. So I have another script that is called Rollback Tenant. And essentially what that does is it reads the configuration. So you remember we were generating 2 files. So one Azure AD user for all the actual users and another one for AD demo with all the rest of the configuration. Now in this case here, what I'm doing is I'm changing everywhere where the property enter is set to present. I'm flipping that to absent, right? And I'm just going to go and apply that. So essentially, when you're doing an export from a tenant, every time it finds a user, for example, it's going to go, all right, so Bob, ensure present, because it tells the desired state configuration engine to go and create that user. In my case here, I'm saying absent. So if DSC encounters Bob and its property is set to ensure equals absent, it's going to know to go and remove it. So I'm essentially bringing my tenant back in that original state it was in before I started doing that demo. So in my case, whenever you're doing a demo on a regular basis, right, if you're speaking at conferences, if you're doing a demo in front of your tenant, this is super useful, right? Because you can always start with that baseline, that ground zero, and then apply your configuration on top of it. We're using it internally within the Microsoft 365 DSC core team to test to run our integration tests. So we always start with the same state on the tenant. Then we apply a huge configuration that will go and create pretty much an instance of, I think, every single component that we have, every resource. We're going to apply it, make sure that it is configured properly, and then it will just roll back so that we're brought back to that original state. So next time when we do an integration test, we always start from the same starting point. So on that note, I wish you all a good day. Stay safe, take care, and until we meet again.